Today here we are with the new Vpropel question of the day, and the name of this question is lucky card. So in this question we have been given with a matrix and a pattern named as P. We have just to find that if this pattern P can be formed using any of this particular row or column of this matrix or not. If this particular pattern P can be formed using any of these rows or columns of this matrix, then we will print lucky player. And if not, that this pattern P cannot be formed using any of the rows or columns of this matrix, then we will print unlucky player. So the main logic that we are going to use inside this question is, first of all we will input this matrix M, and after inputting the matrix M from the user, when we have the pattern P, we will check that this pattern P can be formed. Can this pattern P be formed using these rows of the matrix? The first row, the second row, the third row. If not, then we will find the transpose of this matrix, and from this transpose here we will check that this pattern be formed using all these rows of the matrix or not. If not, if this pattern P cannot be formed using this matrix or even the transpose of this matrix, then the pattern can never be formed. Because what is transpose? By transpose I only mean that in the columns present inside this matrix M are getting converted into rows in this transpose matrix. So if I'm not able to find the pattern P using any of these columns or rows, then I will print unlucky player. So first of all, let's input n, that is number of rows, integer input. After then, I'm going to input the number of columns present inside this matrix. Now let's create an empty list. Now let's create an empty list inside which I'm going to store all the rows present inside this matrix. All these rows I've been given a space separated value. For all these rows I've been given a space separated value, QWERASDF. So what I'm going to do is, I'll input all these space separated values and convert them in the format of a list and then store it inside this list named as matrix. So the format to take space separated input present inside this list is list map in str input dot split. And how many times do I have to take these space separated inputs? The number of times the number of rows present in this matrix. So for I in range small n, for small n, I'm running this for loop the number of times the number of rows present inside this matrix, and each time it is running, it inputs space separated values and then convert it into a list and then store it inside this list named as matrix. Now let's take the pattern from the user as input. After inputting this pattern, I'm going to convert it into list so that I'll be able to check that if this particular pattern is present inside any of these rows of this matrix or not. So the main logic that we are going to use here is, first of all, we have been given a matrix and a pattern. Inside this matrix, I'm going to check that if any of these rows can be used to create this pattern, then I'll put the value of flag as true, and after then if not, then I'll put the value of flag as false. After then I'm going to create the transpose of this matrix. And how I create the transpose of this matrix, and what do I mean by transpose is, transpose is generally when there's a matrix named as M, when all the rows of the matrix get converted to columns and all the columns inside this matrix get converted to row. QWER is the first row of this matrix, and now in this transpose matrix, QWER is the first column of this matrix. So I will find the transpose of this matrix, and after finding the transpose, I will check that if this particular pattern can be formed using any of these rows of this matrix or not. And if not, if this particular pattern cannot be formed using all the rows of the matrix and any of the rows of the transpose matrix, then I'll print unlucky player. And if this pattern can be formed using any of these rows of the matrix M or transpose T, then I'll print lucky player. So now let's focus on how can we create transpose matrix. So in order to create transpose matrix, I'm creating a transpose list, and now I'm going to run a for loop for I in range M. The transpose matrix will contain the number of rows that are the number of columns. The number of rows present inside this transpose matrix are equal to the number of columns present inside this inside this matrix M. So I'm going to run a for loop for I in range M. M is the number of columns present inside this matrix, and for I in range N, N is the number of rows present inside this matrix. And I'm going to create an empty list here, and inside this empty list I'll store the corresponding elements to be placed inside the rows of this transpose matrix. So first of all, if we see here 1 comma 1, if we find the index value of q inside this list matrix, its index value is 1 comma 1. The index value of w is 1 comma 2. So now here in the transpose matrix, the index value of q is 1 comma 1, but the index value of w is 2 comma 1. 2 is a row number and 1 is the column number. So here we can see that the position values get reversed. Here the position value of w was 1 comma 2 inside the matrix, and inside this transpose matrix the position value of w is 2 comma 1. So in the same way I'm going to append l dot append. I'm going to append in I'm going to reverse these position values. That first of all, the position value of the particular element will be I comma j, so I'm going to reverse it as j comma I. And after reversing these position values, I'm going to store these inside the list named as L, and at the end of the for loop I'll append this list to the nested list named as transpose that we created here, transpose dot append L. So let's print what is the transpose list that we have got. Wait, j is not defined. Okay, for j in range. So the transpose. So this was our matrix QWER. So we wanted to create we wanted to create a transpose like this: QAZ first row, WSX second row, EDC third row, RFB fourth row. So how we did it is we reversed the position values inside this matrix. If we see what is the position value of D here, it is present in the second row and third column. 2 comma 3 will be its position values, but in this transpose matrix its position value is 3 comma 2, third row second column. So we just reversed these position values. In place of I comma j, we placed it as j comma I, and after at the end of the for loop I appended the list L inside the universal list, or I should say transpose list transpose. So after we print this transpose list, the output is QAZ WSX EDC RFE. So we have successfully found the transpose of this matrix. So now our task is to check that this pattern can be formed using this transpose list or the matrix list. So just to check this thing, I'm going to create a function check check, and the parameters that I'm going to take is array comma pattern PATTERN. So what exactly I'm going to do here is, first of all I'll run a for loop inside this matrix M, and after then I'll put the value of the counter as 0. After I have started the counter as 0, I'll run a for loop inside this list QWER, that is the first row of this matrix, ASDF the second row of the matrix, and ZXCV the third row of the matrix. I'll be running a for loop inside these rows, and one by one, if the value of if the elements present inside these rows match with the elements present inside the pattern P, then increase the value of counter with 1. सो वट एग्जैक्टली आई एम गोइंग टू डू हियर इज कि पहले मैं एक फॉर लूप यहाँ पे रन करूँगा इस मैट्रिक्स के अंदर, फिर उसके बाद मैं दूसरा फॉर लूप रन करूँगा इन रोज़ के अंदर, और जैसे जैसे मुझे ये फॉर लूप रन होगा, और तब मैं एक कंडीशन लगाऊंगा कि अगर इस रो के अंदर ये जो एलिमेंट है, अगर ये सेम एलिमेंट पैटर्न के अंदर भी है हमारे, तो काउंटर की वैल्यू को 1 से इंक्रीज कर दो. If the element present inside this row is same as the element present inside the pattern, then increase the value of counter by 1, and if not, just continue. And after the end of one for loop, the end of one for loop marks that at the end of one row. So after the end of at the end of one row, if the value of the counter if the value of the counter is equal to the length of the pattern P, then we will come out of the for loop, and we will print that this pattern P can be formed using this matrix M, and we'll print lucky player. So let's start it out. And first of all, I'll put the value of flag as false. Now I'm going to run a for loop for I in range. So sorry, for I in array. Now for j in I, this is nested for loop. Now I'm going to check that if jth element of this ith row is present inside this pattern also, if this jth element of the ith row is also present inside the pattern, then here I'm going to initialize a counter c equal to 0. Now if the jth element is present inside the pattern, then increase the value of counter with by 1, and at the end of the for loop, which is at the end of the loop, at the end of a row, if the length of pattern PATTERN is equal to C, that is the value of counter. If the length of the pattern is equal to C, then put the value of flag as true and come out of the for loop, break the for loop. Okay, so this is the thing that we are going to do here, and return the value of flag FL FLAG. सो बेसिकली हम यहाँ पे कर क्या रहे हैं कि पहले हम फ्लैग की वैल्यू को फॉल्स रख दे रहे हैं, उसके बाद हम एक फॉर लूप चला रहे हैं एरे के अंदर, फिर एक काउंटर इनिशियलाइज कर रहे हैं जीरो को लेके, उसके बाद हम दूसरा फॉर लूप चला रहे हैं फॉर जे इन आई inside the row of this inside the rows of this matrix, and inside the row of this matrix I am taking element by element. If the particular element, if one element of this row is present inside this pattern, then increase the value of counter by 1, and at the end of a row, after we have completed one iteration inside a row, if the value of counter c is equal to the length of the pattern, which tells us that we have found all the patterns, we have found all the words present inside the pattern inside this particular row, then put the value of flag as true and come out of the for loop and break it. So basically हम यही कर रहे थे, and now let's check that. Check one इक्वल टू, पहले हम चेक करेंगे कि मैट्रिक्स हम पहले अपनी ओरिजिनल मैट्रिक्स को लेके चेक करेंगे ये चीज़ की. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल हम check one equal to check matrix. First of all, run this function and take the parameters as the matrix and pattern. check2 check. Then I'm going to take the parameters as transpose matrix and the pattern, PWTERN transpose matrix and the pattern, and here here the return of this function is in the format of flag, and here we are supposed to say that if this particular pattern can be formed using this matrix or the transpose matrix, then print lucky player. So what I'm going to do here is, if check1 check1 or check2, if check1 or check2, if check1 or check2, agar in after we are doing the or operation over these, the value over these flag values that we have found here, if this value comes to be true, if check1 or check2 equal to true, then print lucky player, else print unlucky. सो बेसिकली हम यहाँ पे कर क्या रहे हैं कि पहले हमने चेक वन में चेक का जो हमने फंक्शन बनाया था, उसके अंदर हमने मैट्रिक्स को डाला और पैटर्न को डाला, एंड आफ्टर देन हम पास करें ट्रांसपोज मैट्रिक्स को और पैटर्न को. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल व्हाट वी आर डूइंग हियर इज, we are passing the parameters as matrix and pattern, and checking that if this pattern can be formed using this matrix alone, or, and after then I'm putting the parameters as transpose and the pattern, checking that if this pattern can be formed using these rows of the pattern transpose matrix or not. And after then after I have found the values of the, after I have the values of these check1 and check2 variables, and these values are in the format of true or false, as I've returned the flag value. So if check1 or check2, which means that after I'm applying or operation over these check1 and check2 values, there can only be two possibilities: the result will be true or the result will be false. If check1, if the value of the check1 is true and the value of check2 is true, then the result will be true. So we know that the or operation outputs the result as true if any of the input parameter is true, and the check and the OR operation outputs the result as false if both of the parameters are false. So if any of this if this pattern can be formed using any of these matrix list or the transpose list, then the output will be true. And if not, that this pattern cannot be formed using even using the matrix list or even using the transpose list, then the output will be false, and we will be getting unlucky player as the output. So let's run this code. So yeah, our code is completely correct, as it has given the correct expected output. So but we also need to print the row inside which this pattern was present. So what I'm going to do here is, at the point when I'm checking that the length of the pattern is equal to c, the value of the counter, then at the same point I'm going to create a variable named as string, and I'm going to store the value of I. The value of I is the ith row inside which the value of sorry not I, j. J is the jth row inside which this was found clear that the length of the pattern is present inside the length of the pattern is equal to c, which means that this particular jth row can be used to create this pattern p. So here if the condition stays true, so if this condition stands true, then store the value of j, that is the row inside which it was found that this pattern can be found using this row. Then store the value of j inside this string variable, and at the time of returning the function, also return this thing, also return the string. But if this condition fails, if this conditions does not stand true any of the time, after all of the possible iteration we are not able to find that row which can be used to create this pattern, then we will be getting an error named as string undefined at the time of returning the function. So here I'm going to create an empty string named as string empty string. But after so that why I'm creating this empty string is that if this particular condition fails every single time, then there will be something named as string. Even if it is the empty string, it will get returned from this function. And but if I don't create here, if I remove this line empty string, then I'll be getting an error named as string not defined, variable not defined error. And if any time by any chance I get that this condition stands true, then the value of the string will be updated to j, and I'll be getting the particular row which can be made the particular row which can be used to make this pattern. So here I'm going to put check 1 0, as now here I'm getting an array as the return from this function check 1 0 and check 2 0. Zero position is occupied by the flag value, that is true and false. And after then printing lucky player. Okay, before this lucky player I have to print the value of the string, the value of the row which will be used to create this pattern p. Print wait a minute check 0, not 0 1, check 1 1, or check 2 check 2 1. So I'm performing an OR operation here is that if the return of this check function at the first index is an empty string, for any of this parameter, any of this input parameter, and the other one contains the actual row, then the actual row one will be printed out, not the empty string, as the OR operation only prints the high value, not the low value, and the empty string is considered as low value, so it won't be getting printed here. So check 1 1 or check 2 1. So I guess this time it will be correct completely. Wait. Oh, wait a minute. Are you kidding me? F. What? Like, is this a joke or what? Okay. I understood here. J stands for a particular element of that row, and I stands for the whole complete row. I was like, okay, that's alright. I thought, why it is printing F? It stands for something else. Okay, so F here is a part of the pattern, as J stands for the particular element inside this row and I stands for the complete row. So sorry for that. I should be storing the value of I inside the string. Like, what's going on here? Okay, so this time it should be correct. ASDF, yeah. I've gotten the output as ASDF. But here if I see the expected output is ADFS without any space between them and in the format of a string ADSF. So here I have to sort it. So here I have while at the time of returning it, I'm going to sort this list. And the second thing is that I have to print all these elements inside this list in the format of a string without any space. So here I have sorted the string, sorted the list, so ADFS. So here I have to convert it into string. Wait, I have to convert this list into string, and without any spaces I have to print this. Now here I'm going to use string.join function, an empty character dot join, and here this is a list. As we all know that string.join function is that all these elements present inside this list will be joined with each other with the string character that we are placing here. And here I'm going to place an empty string character. So here what doing here is I'm using string.join function, and this join function takes list as a parameter, as we have here ADFS as the list. So what it is going to happen here is, after I perform this thing, after I perform this particular function, string.join function, it joined this list ADFS with a special without any spaces between them, as the string that I've placed here is an empty string. So it joined all the corresponding elements inside this list with an empty string, so ADFS. But still, why it did not pass the test cases? Okay, my English is quite bad. Player, player. Okay, player. So let's check that this time it will be correct or not. So yeah, success, your code has passed all test cases. So our code has completely passed all the test cases. So the main thing that we did here was, the main logic of this code was to find the transpose of this matrix that we are taking from the user, and inside all these nested lists, just to check that if this pattern can be formed using any of the rows of this list or not. And if yes, then return the value of flag, and with the value of flag return the string, that is the row using which this particular pattern can be formed. So this was quite a good question for today's POD, and at the moment when I got the output as F, I was seriously surprised at that is it a joke they're trying to pull my leg or what? But then I realized that I made a small error in my code, and after when I corrected it, my code passed all the test cases. So this was all for today's POD. I hope that you must have found my explanation correct. So do share it with all your friends who are not able to solve today's POD. Thank you. Have a nice day. Keep learning, keep coding.